Welcome one and all to this, the final session of this extraordinary conference on loving God and neighbor and word indeed. In this session, we'll have concluding statements, summary statements from Professor Miroslav Volf and His Highness Prince Ghazi. And then there will be an opportunity for questions to Professor Volf and Prince Ghazi on the part of the press. So let me begin by calling on Professor Miroslav Volf to give us his summary statement.
My dear friends, I think the first order of business for me is to thank some extraordinarily important people without whom this conference would absolutely be impossible. There's so many of them, actually there are a whole army of them, that I cannot name them all by name. I can indicate to you categories of those who have worked diligently in order to make our time together, this conference as well as workshop that preceded it, possible. First, I want to mention the students of the Hartford Seminary who have offered their generous services, and I want to thank them very much, as well as the president of Hartford Seminary, Dr. Heidi Hadsel. Also, staff of the Pathway for Mutual Respect working on U.S.-Iran relations, especially John Hartley and Rob Evans, have worked very hard for us. And of course, there are many other volunteers inside and outside of Yale. I also need to mention administration of Yale University, above all administration of Yale Divinity School, at the head of which is H.R.H, who have supported us throughout this. But most of all, I think I have to thank the staff of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Again, many names here who have joined us specifically for this conference. I must mention two specifically. Many others you will have noticed, but two I have to mention specifically because we don't have time to go into all others who deserve to be mentioned. And one is Amanda Jones. I have come to think of her as the splendid General Jones. Kind of calm eye in the kind of storm of this organization. And finally, I think I want to mention Director of the Reconciliation Program, Reverend Joseph Cumming. He was absolutely extraordinary, as you have already heard in the preparation for the conference. Organizationally, he was extraordinary during the conference and tending to details and to the big vision. And what's especially extraordinary is that notwithstanding all of that work, he has attended and participated as scholars among scholars. And I just have to tell you, Joseph, I have absolutely no idea how you do it all. We thank you very much for that. And finally, my very dear friend, His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi, he needs also special mention. He has worked very hard and tirelessly during these conferences. I'll tell you a secret. He told me that on the average he slept 2 to 3 hours a night. Now that's dedication to the work of this conference, to the success of conversations that we are having. And without him present here, without him preparing for this conference, and I think above all, without him offering original vision of the common word, none of this would be possible. So we are deeply, deeply grateful to your work. Let me just try to offer a few comments that would pull things a little bit together in terms of what was going on at the conference. Presupposition of our conference, what made this conference possible, is this, of course, extraordinary document, Common Word, the substance of that extraordinary document, and that is that what binds Muslims and Christians together is their love for God and love for neighbors. All the participants in this conference, Muslim participants, have signed on to the Common Word. They were the Common Word participants of this conference. The same is also, in slightly different sense, true of the participants from the Christian side. They too, great majority of them, have signed Yale response, positive response to the common word. So what bound us together before we even came is this identification with the process, identification with the vision. And given that identification, it was possible for us, of course, to have very fruitful conversations. We had two parts to this gathering during the past 6 days or so. First part was a workshop. It was a scholarly workshop. And during that scholarly workshop, we were pressing some of the very hard questions that Professor Nasser has mentioned so eloquently to us during his final remarks. What is it that binds Christians and Muslims together? What do we mean by love? What do we mean by neighbor? What do we mean by putting love and neighbor together? Even also, what do we mean by God and the extent to which we worship the same God? None of the agreement that there exists here can be sustained unless we have clarity on those very fundamental issues, and we have grappled with those issues, and I think we have grappled with them with honesty, and we have grappled with them with insight. The larger conference itself was of a different texture and different character. Religious scholars were now joined by major religious and political leaders, and our major question was, on the basis of this agreement or even convergence on love of God and love of neighbor, what might be our task in the world today? How do we take a common word and make it something for the common good? Peace of the world was at the center of our attention, and peace of the world as refracted through the relationships between our two communities, Muslims and Christians, and of course, our older sibling in this family of Abrahamic faiths, Judaism. So that was the thrust of the conference as a whole, was more toward outside. And as we participated in this conference and in discussions, what I've heard from the participants, what I myself have observed as I was participating, was on the one hand that we had a kind of serious, if you want, spiritual engagement with one another. That already was given by the signatures that we have placed on the common word and also on this Yale response, because we have said something here profound bound us. That translated, I think, into certain spiritual commonality. And I have found that my own spirituality has been enriched rather than diminished together in this group. I think we have we can engage in our exchanges also with intellectual rigor. We have struggled seriously about claims of faith that are not simply expressions of our vague sentiments, but claims of faith that make truth claims that can possibly clash, and that demand all our strength, all our intellectual attention, all our mind in order to grapple with, in order to understand. We have also addressed issues with practical sensitivity. Many of the very practical day-to-day issues that Muslims and Christians are facing as they live their ordinary lives, they too were part and parcel of our discussions. Whether that is a religious freedom, whether that is maligning of others in the name of your own religion, whether there is the differences and debates about the points of doctrines, all of these issues and many more have been part and parcel of our discussions, often not at the center of discussions, but always present as an aura which qualified all of our discussions, always present also on the sidelines. And we've had very profitable conversations in session and also outside on those. And I've said already that our exchanges have been characterized by frankness and honesty. And as I was writing this down for myself, I remembered comrades in the Communist Party who had frank and honest exchanges. And when the newspapers wrote about frank and honest exchanges, you know that some noses were bleeding and some eyes were blue, because the exchanges were so fierce and euphemism for the struggle that was going on. Now we did have frank exchanges. We did have honest exchanges. we looked at each other in the eye and said what we saw to be the case, to be truth, even if it seemed unpleasant and unacceptable to the other side. But I must tell you, we never came close to anything like blows. We have carried those frank and honest exchanges in the spirit of this whole conference. And that's so amazing about it for me, which was we talked about love of God and love of neighbor, and in the very talking and the very exercise of talking about love of God and neighbor, we practiced love of God and love of neighbor. And that, too, for me, was an exciting part of this conference. As I have mentioned in my introductory remarks, I think one of the geniuses of the common word, one of the geniuses of the idea that what binds Christians and Muslims together is their love of God and love of neighbor, is that it makes one thing possible which critics of religion often think that it is impossible. Critics of religion often think that it's impossible for a person to go deep into their faith, to have strong faith convictions, and at the same time to be friendly toward others. The deeper you go into your religious conviction, the adage is, the more at odds with the other person you will be. I think the common word has helped us to reverse that. Deeper you go into your religious convictions, which are defined by love of God and love of neighbor, the closer you can get to the other person without thereby requiring for you to think alike as the other person. You know, I always thought that it is an insult to human nature. I always thought it's an insult to me as a religious person if the requirement is made that I have to believe like another person believes in order to live in peace with that other person. We need to find resources of faith to live together in peace, notwithstanding our differences. So we worked here on those large reconciliation issues, and what my hopes are is that we will continue to work them as we go back to our own homes and places, that we will continue to engage intellectually with those issues, both in Muslim and in the Christian community, and in conversation between these two communities. I myself have been intellectually immensely stimulated, not the least on the treadmill. I have had a Muslim interlocutor going on treadmill with me every morning, just about every morning, at 5:30, and we discussed some weighty issues of theology and of metaphysics, and I hope that such conversations would also continue because they provide the basis of what we are doing here. But also, not just intellectual conversations, I hope that the conversations that will continue are the conversations that go to the grassroots, that actions also will continue that go to the grassroots so that we can have a grassroots movement around the common word, common love of God and neighbor between the two communities. Now, I have worked on reconciliation issues for some time. I've written on reconciliation, less on interfaith reconciliation than on other forms of reconciliation. And one thing I know, and one thing those who work on reconciliation know very well, is that in order to work for reconciliation, you don't need just, or you ought not just look each other in the eyes, sit across each other at the table, try to figure out how to settle your differences. What helps in reconciliation project often is if you have a common goal, so that if you two together can not just look at each other, but can look at the challenge that stands before you. And I think I want to leave you with that notion, that as we think about reconciliation between our great communities, that we also think about what Muslims and Christians can do together with all other people of good faith, especially with our Jewish friends who belong to the same family, monotheistic faiths, what we can do for our common future, for our common world. I don't need to remind you that the world is caught up in what has been dubbed as globalization processes. Nobody quite knows what that is, or there are many theories of globalization. I think what most people sense is that globalization is good news for some, and it is a bad news for others. It is so much the good news for some that some expect from it almost divine miracles. And it is so much the bad news for others that they encounter in it almost an incarnation of evil. Now, whichever perspective you take, and maybe you take a mixture of these two, I think it's undeniable that globalization processes have significant negative impact upon great number of people in the world today. From their cultures, from undermining some of their cultural goods, to leaving them without sustenance, to degrading the environment, and so forth, and so forth. So there are challenges of the shadow side of globalization processes, which I think all people in the world face, and I think Muslims and Christians, as two most numerous faiths, face as well. And I want to encourage us to think not simply of each other as neighbors, but to think of the whole world in which we live as a neighborhood. To turn away simply from facing each other to how we can together contribute to resolving, to diminishing some of the impacts, negative impacts of globalization. How can we practice love, neighborly love, in our globalized world? Many things are globalized in the world. Capital is globalized, goods and services are globalized, media is globalized, everything is globalized in the world. Maybe it's time, as my dear friend Peter Kuzmich told me this morning, maybe it's time for us to think of globalizing love. Now, that sounds like 60s, right? All you need is love. I'm not going to start singing this thing for you. But if you understand under love, not this mushy sentiment, which comes and goes, as Professor Nasser has also mentioned, if we think of love not simply attachment to what we think is beautiful for us and good for us, because then it ends up being an elevated form of selfishness, if we think of love as benevolence, if we think of love as beneficence, if we think of love as permeated by concerns for justice and for the good of other people, then I think we can speak of the need today to globalize love, robust love, to make neighborly love the principle with which we work in the world as a whole. You will recall that John Kerry, in his opening remarks, has quoted the poet Auden, who said, you will have either, this is my paraphrase now, either love or death. And in many ways, when you think about it, this is the challenge that we are facing today. And that's what I want to leave all of us as we go our ways. Let us learn to love each other. Let us learn to love all our neighbors, and let us do that in the name of our common future and in the name of our one God. Thank you very much.
And I would like to call to the podium Prince Ghazi.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and peace and blessings of God be upon the last of prophets.
Enter together. The first is, I would like to recognize, welcome and acknowledge His Royal Eminence, the Sultan of Sokoto, the leader of all the Muslims of Nigeria, 70 million, Al-Hajj Muhammad Saad Abu Bakr, who has graced us with his presence, and apologize to him also that I did not announce him and mention him in my introductory talks because I didn't know he was coming. So it's been a wonderful, delightful surprise and honor for him to come here. Anybody who has been to West Africa knows that the Sultan of Sokoto is the leader of Muslims in West Africa. And anybody who knows this Sultan knows that from the moment he assumed the throne in Sokoto, which is the premier throne of the houses of chiefs and kings in Nigeria, he has worked tirelessly and courageously to implementing what we have been talking about ourselves with his Christian partners in Nigeria, So I would like to recognize him now. Now, Miroslav and myself and some of the friends have drafted together a text which we hope will come out of the friends gathered here. I think the text is before you. We are going to do this way. We're going to look for ijma', consensus. If there are dissenting voices, we're going to look for a majority. If we don't get a majority, Miroslav and I will release it in our own names. So, does it require that I read it, that we read the text together? All right. Bismillah. Common Word, an open letter addressed by Muslim leaders to Christian leaders, began with a desire by Muslim leaders to follow the Quranic commandment to speak to Christians and Jews, quoting, "Say, O people of the Scripture, come to a common word between us and you, that we shall worship none but God, that we shall ascribe no partner unto him." Al-Imran 64. The intention behind the common word is not to foist the theology of one religion upon another or to attempt conversion. Neither does it seek to reduce both our religions to an artificial union based upon the two commandments. Nevertheless, in a common word, Muslims recognized that Islam and Christianity do share an essential common ground, the love of God and love of neighbor described in the two greatest commandments of the gospel, rooted in the Torah. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The response of over 500 Christian leaders initiated by Yale University reaffirmed that this common ground is real and is a basis for dialogue between our two religions. A common word is rooted in our sacred texts, arising from within, not imposed from without. Love of God and love of the neighbor are part of our common Abrahamic heritage. Based upon this principle, ours is an effort to ensure that religions heal rather than wound, nourish the human soul rather than poison human relations. These two commandments teach us both what we must demand of ourselves and what we should expect from the other, and what we should do, what we say, and what we are. Participants in the conference discussed a range of theological and practical issues in an open manner characterized by honesty and goodwill. The theological issues discussed included different understandings of the unity of God, of Jesus Christ, alayhi salam, and his passion, alayhi salam is not in the text, and of the love of God. The practical issues included world poverty, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the situation in Palestine and Israel, the dangers of further wars, and freedom of religion. Participants of the conference agreed that 1. Muslims and Christians affirm the unity and absoluteness of God. We recognize that God's merciful love is infinite, eternal, and embraces all things. This love is central to both our religions and is at the heart of the Judeo-Christian Islamic monotheistic heritage. 2. We recognize that all human beings have the right to the preservation of life, religion, property, intellect, and dignity. No Muslim or Christian should deny the other these rights, nor should they tolerate the denigration or desecration of one another's sacred symbols, founding figures, or places of worship. 3. We are committed to these principles and to furthering them through continuous dialogue. We thank God for bringing us together in this historic endeavor and ask that He purify our intentions and grant us success through His all-encompassing mercy and love. 4. We Christian and Muslim participants meeting together at Yale for the Historical Common Word Conference denounce and deplore threats made against those who engage in interfaith dialogue. Dialogue is not a departure from faith. It is a legitimate means of expression and an essential tool in the quest for the common good. So, I will ask, have we anybody who will not sign his name to this, of the participants? Thank you. I have thanked everybody already, but I would like to say thank you to everyone again. For me, the conference has been marked by acts of love from everyone around. Acts like Professor Nas, who came here panting because he's just had a heart operation. To see Professor Mahmoud Ayoub and Don Wagner working together, I thought that was very touching. To see the humility of Reverend Schuller saying at the age of 80, a man with 20 million viewers and 37 books, saying, I want to learn at this age. To see Senator Kerry coming from the Senate, flying in, having worked so hard on his speech, speaking with passion and earnestness about what he believes, and then going right back. I thought all those were generous. To see Reverend Schenk and his apology, that was really moving for his behavior, or for the behavior of others in Muslim lands. That was really moving. Those were acts of love, very much in spirit with the theme of this conference. You know, of course, all of you, or the Muslims know certainly, that there are two paradises in the Quran, essentially. In the commentary, these are paradise of the soul and the paradise of the spirit. And whilst one paradise is looking at God, looking towards God, وَجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ, another paradise is what I think the Christians call the communion of the saints. People visiting each other in love, being together in love in heaven. So it came to my heart a little bit this morning that in such gatherings there is a sort of fractured earthly presentiment of this felicity which we are all promised. Thank you all again.
At this time, we'll open the floor to questions from the press. Only from the press. Participants in the conference have had an opportunity for engaging in dialogue over the course of the last several days. And I'd ask those who are going to pose their questions to come forward to the microphone so that the questions may be recorded and translated. And to moderate the conversation, I'd like to call on Dr. Ibrahim Khalin of Georgetown University. Prince Ghazi has to catch a plane, so.
Let's give him a round of applause as he leaves.
A slight correction. Professor Khalin from Georgetown will be taking questions in lieu of Prince Ghazi. So the floor is now open for questions from the press. Please.
My name is Neela Banerjee, and I have some questions from the Yale Alumni Magazine. One of the things that seems to distinguish this interfaith conference is not that it's not just scholars, but people with great followings within the Muslim world and the Christian world. So when you talk about taking this action, Professor Volf, when you spoke about taking what's been learned here back to their communities, their adherents, I mean, if you could wish out loud for us, and also you, Professor Camille, what exactly would you like to see them do on a concrete level? What would you like to hear if you were sitting in the pews somewhere or in a mosque somewhere? Thanks very much.
Thanks for the question. There are two sides to this initiative. There are a number of things going on, as was mentioned in the statement. There will be 3 more major meetings with other Christian groups. But one of the things we hope to achieve is what we call traction and trickle down. That is, we have a track record in these efforts, first of all. We start as engagement at this very high level. That's one thing, and I think we have achieved something really significant here over the last week or so. You have a large group of prominent, eminent scholars, preachers, community leaders, religious leaders gathered here, and they will take something back to their communities, and that was really significant. So what happened was that, on the one hand, we had theological exchanges, articulation of different positions, but at the same time, I think we have a remarkable potential for unprecedented reaching out, when these religious leaders and community leaders go back. Secondly, trickle down will probably come as we continue these initiatives and as these religious leaders speak about what was discussed here. And it's already happening. If you look at the signatories of the Common Word from the Muslim side, it really represents a significant majority, something that you haven't seen in the modern history of Islam. And the number of signatories, those who endorsed the letter afterwards, keeps increasing, actually. And if you look at the Christian responses, you have a similar consensus on their side also. So the trickle-down will come as we continue this. And one of the concrete proposals, actually, that came out of this discussions was to designate a week around the world where each religious community will ask their leaders and followers to speak about the good in the other tradition. If we can have something established like this throughout the globe, starting here in Europe and other places, and do the same in the Muslim world, I think that will have significant implications and repercussions.
Maybe a few more things. I don't know whether you have the document here, practical outcomes of the conference. There's a list of practical outcomes. You can see some of the things that we are planning, and we are open for suggestions as well. I think most of us think of it as a long-term initiative, that is carried at various levels, including very much grassroots level through web-based means and other means, even education. I have yesterday spoken to one participant at the conference who has said he has spoken to one head of state in an Arab country, and they have agreed that Common Word is going to be part and parcel of the curriculum of the schools. So that's a very tangible result, and we have to think about ways in which that can be made more appealing, more widely spread in the Christian world as well.
Hi, my name is Ed Stannard from the New Haven Register. I'm wondering, given the goals of this conference to increase good relations between Christians and Muslims and Jews, how much of that is really dependent on not religious people, but on secular governments working toward things like the Millennium Development Goals established by the United Nations, and whether religious people can influence that? Because the assumption behind my question, I guess, is that if people are poor, hungry, illiterate, and suffering from diseases, they're much less likely to be able to feel good about other people who have much more. So how much is it, particularly the West, how much is a responsibility to bring the poor and up to our standards?
We have talked here primarily about one of the causes of discord between religious people. But religious discord between religious people, in this particular case Muslims and Christians, never have a single cause. They're multi-causal things. So I remember when I was asked during the war in former Yugoslavia, what kind of war is it? Is it religious? Is it about religion? Is it about politics? Is it about economy? Is it about culture? Is it about language? I said yes. It's about all those things. And that's true also in terms of a relationship between Muslims and Christians. Multiplicity of causes are there that reinforce each other. And I think we have here talked about one, reconciliation of our religious traditions, of people of religious traditions on the basis of their religious sensibilities. But one of the reasons why I ended my comments about both of us looking outward, not simply toward each other, is precisely to emphasize the importance of us working together on great issues that are facing our world today, from world poverty, from economic degradation and struggle for for very small and diminishing resources, and so on. And it's only when we have this multi-pronged approach, of which religious approach is only one, will we be able to contribute to a lasting peace in the world today.
Tom Hennigan from Reuters News Agency. A meeting like this is very interesting because on both the Muslim and the Christian side, people getting to know each other, people having interesting conversations and learning new things. Can you say in general, I know it's difficult, but can you say in general, on the Christian side, was there one main thing that many Christian participants felt they learned about the Muslim side, and on the Muslim side that they learned about the Christian side?
What a great question, and what an impossible question. It's great and impossible at the same time. Impossible because what one person might have learned, the other person might have already known. We come here from very diverse backgrounds, both Muslims and Christians, some with extended history of engagement with one another, some were almost bushy-tailed, looking at each other for the first time and learning about each other. So there's a wide spectrum of things. But I can speak for myself. On that treadmill, I have learned very important things. Not maybe something that I can put definitely my finger on, but a broad sensibility of possibilities of agreement. I think that's a very important learning, and I think that the most important learning that has taken place has probably taken place around coffee, tea, meal conversations, a learning that has happened less on the basis, less in terms of what one could have read in a book, but more in terms of how human destinies have been intertwined, a sensibility that has been acquired about the perspective of the other. And that is often intangible, but real value of the conference like that, irreplaceable by anything else.
Thanks, Tom. Great question. And I want to acknowledge, actually, your great coverage also about the conference. I will give an answer that will be more historical than theological. I think Miroslav summarized the spirit quite well. A Muslim scholar from Andalusia in the 12th century goes to Baghdad to attend some discussion groups. And when he arrives there, one of the things he's presented with is that in these discussions of multi-religious groups, that is Muslims, Jews, Christians, and probably other religious groups that were available there, one of the rules is that no one is going to quote from his sacred scripture. Everything will be based on intellectual arguments. And this Andalusian scholar was really surprised. In fact, he didn't like this rule. He said, what do you mean? Like, we don't quote from our sacred scriptures. But the idea, I think, was that you really go beyond your particular borders and reach out to something that is universal. And I think we felt this very much during the workshops and the conference. Some of the discussions reminded me, and I think many other people in the audience from the Muslim side, that what we are doing here is very similar to what Muslims, Christians, Jews, and others were doing in Cordoba, in Baghdad, in Basra, in Isfahan, in the great cosmopolitan cities of Islam. And I think everybody celebrated the fact that what a great achievement that was back then and what a great achievement it is today.
Chris Hurlinger from Religion News Service and also a visiting fellow at the Div School. It's good to be here. Just two questions. One, how do you formalize the week every year of representatives, different traditions, speaking well of the other? I just wonder if there's a plan in place to formalize that. Second, we understand there were Jewish guests, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit on how they participated, what their insights were, etc.
Let me answer the first question. The idea is to have a designated day or week where Muslims and Christians, churches, mosques, and other organizations will recognize that day and adapt certain activities, etc., to talk about the positive aspects of the other traditions so that we can build bridges. That will be at the grassroots level. The impact will be at the grassroots level. But to achieve that, we have to have the leadership engaged in this. And we envision some kind of a two-tier approach to this. First, it has to be accepted by various religious communities, churches and mosques. And then, if it is going to be formalized, it will have to be taken to a higher level, an international body like the United Nations, perhaps.
Maybe just a word about the second part of the question about the older brother in Abrahamic family and his presence among us here. Indeed, I think that's how we think about these conversations that we are having. We're having conversations between siblings within the Abrahamic family. And that's why it is absolutely essential for us, even if these conversations are bilateral conversations between Muslims and Christians, just like there are bilateral conversations between Muslims and Jews and so forth, and Christians and the Jewish community. Even though this is a bilateral process, it is absolutely essential for us to have always listening in, looking over the shoulder, participating actively in all of our conversation, Jewish presence. That's very significant, because this process cannot be a process that excludes anybody. It has to be the process that includes others as well. This is not a process against anybody, it's a process for each other and for the common good.
Thank you. James Reinl from the National. His Highness Prince Ghazi opened this conference by defining 5 main factors in the world driving global religious tensions. He cited Palestine, US foreign policy, terrorism, fundamentalism, and conversions. I was wondering what practical approaches stem from the Common Word Conference in ways to move forward on these critical issues.
First, a little correction. He said these are the obstacles to world peace. These are not the causes of religious tension in the world. So, he was outlining the main 5 causes that exist as an obstacle to world peace. As it was stated in the Common Word, in fact, this is a peace-driven agenda. The idea is to establish peace between Christians and Muslims to the extent possible, to help and contribute to world peace. And extremism is an important element in that discussion. We have extremism on all sides, and it has to be addressed by mainstream majority religious leaders and communities. And I think it's happening right now as we speak. So that will be one of the things. Other political issues, the Palestine issue, wars, etc., they are, I think, on everybody's agenda and on everybody's mind. Religious leaders do not make policy, but they have ways of influencing it, and public perception, public opinion. So they can make a contribution as they get involved in these issues without necessarily being outly political. All right, then I stand corrected.
Right. Maybe just simply to add to this, where I perceive the importance of this project in terms of countering some of the extremist tendencies in religion. I think this kind of a process, as well as other processes, I think it's absolutely, let me step back from this process and then connect it with this process. I think it's absolutely essential to give in the public space a voice to religious people qua religious people. If you shut down their religious voice, it will drive them to extremism. Because religion will not have within the public space legitimate modes of expressing itself, and yet for people, many religious people, this is the guiding force, driving force, organizing force of their whole lives. And then the key question is, well, how do you provide that space in such a way that a fruitful conversation and peaceful conversation can take place? And I think the Common Word provides a very significant and important platform to make this possible. Because Common Word, as I've stated before, allows you to be deeply religious. And on the basis of this deep religiosity, still accept, still embrace, indeed still love the other. That provides a framework, I think, almost like a mentality framework in which engagement of religious factors, religious actors within the public arena is possible. When that becomes possible, I think the need for religious extremism will diminish. People will be able to achieve their goals or will be able to participate in achieving their goals through legitimate, democratic, and other means.
Are there further questions? If not, then let's bring this conference to a conclusion. This has been quite an extraordinary week, beginning with the workshop at the Divinity School and culminating in this major conference. It's been a week of intense and often frank conversation about very serious matters. During our time together, I know that I at least have learned from everyone who participated here, Muslim, Christian, and Jew. I have come to appreciate both the passion with which we all love God and neighbor, and the profound respect to sow seeds of peace and reconciliation, and to realize love in action. We have made progress this week in achieving that shared commitment, but there is much work yet to be done. As we leave, let us go forward with a determined optimism that the work will continue and will, inshallah, succeed. For all of you who have participated so fully and faithfully in this conference, depart then with our thanks and deep appreciation. May the merciful and loving God go with you. May God bless you and keep you. May God make his face shine upon you. And may God give you a deep and lasting peace.